You are nothing but a burden, my husband screamed at me as my 71-year-old father-in-law stumbled down the stairs at 3 in the morning, desperate for his pain medication, 6 weeks after hip surgery. I looked at Mark, expecting a shred of human decency, expecting him to help the old man who gave him life. Instead, he turned his cold, dark eyes on me and barked, "Apologize to my wife for making noise, Dad, or get out." I stood frozen in the dim kitchen, listening to the heavy silence of a family breaking apart, until the clock ticked forward and forced me to look back at how this nightmare truly began. The night air in suburban Columbus, Ohio, carried the sharp, damp smell of late October frost. It seeped through the thin glass of the kitchen window, carrying the faint scent of dying leaves and cold asphalt. My feet burned. My lower back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache after an 8-hour shift at the retail store. 8 straight hours. The harsh fluorescent lights bled into my eyes while the endless beep 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 of the barcode scanner echoed in my ears. My hands were dry, rough, and stained faint blue from cheap cash register receipt ink and harsh industrial counter cleaners. I stood over the sink, watching the cold water wash down the drain, listening to the quiet hum of a house that felt less like a home and more like a silent cage. Then came the sound, a dry, scraping drag against the hardwood floor. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It was Arthur Vance. My father-in-law was 71 years old. 3 weeks ago, surgeons cut open his right hip, drilled into his bone, and hammered a heavy steel joint into his body. He was trying to navigate the 14 creaky wooden steps from his small guest room. I had counted those steps the night he moved in. Old wooden stairs. They groaned under the lightest weight. I turned around, wiping my hands on my worn apron. Through the dark hallway, I saw his frail silhouette. He held the wooden banister with a white-knuckle grip. His right hand trembled. His knuckles were raw and swollen from a lifetime of pulling wrenches and shaping steel as a commercial mechanic. In his left hand, he held a plastic water glass. It rattled against his knuckles with a tiny, rhythmic chink. He was breathing through his teeth, a wet, ragged rasp of pain. His pain medication was on the kitchen counter. It sat right next to the silver coffee maker, a small orange bottle under the glare of the stove light. That was the plan. A simple plan, made during the day. But at 3 in the morning, 14 wooden steps felt like a mountain of glass to a man with iron bolted inside his skeleton. Before I could move toward the stairs to help him, a sharp click cut through the dark. The hallway overhead light flooded the space with a blinding, yellow glare. Mark stepped out of the master bedroom. He wore a gray t-shirt and loose sweatpants. He squinted against the light, his face twisted in deep irritation. He didn't look at his father's trembling knees. He didn't look at the sweat glinting on the old man's pale forehead. He looked directly at me. His eyes were narrow, hard, and cold. "Are you serious, Hannah?" Mark's voice was a low, grating whisper, sharp as a razor. Again, "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Mark, your dad needs his—" I started, my voice tight. "I don't care." Mark snapped, stepping closer into my personal space. The heavy smell of his stale coffee breath mixed with the cold air. Every single night, it's the same shuffling, the same creaking, the same noise. "You work a retail job. Hannah, you scan groceries. I run a business. I have clients at 8 in the morning. I need sleep." "He is in pain, Mark," I whispered, holding my ground, though my stomach churned into a tight knot. "He just had surgery. Look at him." Arthur stood on the 4th step from the bottom. His shoulders were slouched. His head hung low, exposing the thin, silver hair at the base of his neck. The yellow light showed the deep, carved lines on his face. He looked tiny. He looked broken. Mark turned toward his father, rubbing the back of his neck with a heavy, performative sigh. "Dad, you have to be more careful. Hannah can't manage this house properly if you're wandering around like a ghost at night. She's exhausted, I'm exhausted, and you're making things impossible." The words hung in the cold air, poisonous and upside down. Mark was using me as his shield. He was blaming my fatigue for his own cruelty. He was twisting my silence into his weapon. "I'm sorry," Arthur said softly. His voice sounded like dry paper rubbing together. "The floor, it creaks. I just needed the pills. Keep them upstairs from now on," Mark said coldly, turning his back on his father and facing me again. He leaned in, lowering his voice, so only I could hear the venom. "Look at what you've done. You let him wander down here. You can't even keep a quiet house. You're invisible all day at that store, and you come home and let this happen." I looked at Mark's face, the man I had been married to for 15 years. I looked at his clean hands, hands that had never lifted anything heavier than an iPad or a golf club. Then I looked at Arthur's rough, scarred hands, hands that had built engines, hands that had paid for the very roof over our heads years ago. Arthur slowly reached the bottom step. He picked up the orange pill bottle from the counter. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't look at me. He filled his glass with tap water, swallowed a single pill, and turned around. Step by painful step, he dragged his body back up into the dark. Mark walked back into our bedroom and slammed the door shut. The loud crack echoed through the empty hallway. I stood alone in the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The cold air pressed against my skin. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my small shift notebook. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard clarity that was settling into my bones. At 6 a.m., the pale gray light of a cold Ohio dawn pushed through the curtains. I walked down the hall to Arthur's guest room to bring him a warm cup of tea before my early shift. The door was open. The small bed was neatly made, the white sheets pulled tight at the corners with military precision. The closet was empty. The small navy blue suitcase Arthur had brought with him 3 weeks ago was gone. On the small wooden desk by the window sat a single piece of lined paper, held down by an old brass wrench. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked up the paper. Written in Arthur's sharp, mechanical print were 7 words. "I will not be a burden anymore." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my pocket. I stood there in the quiet room, looking out at the bare trees shivering in the morning wind. The 15-year trance of my marriage was over. I was done being the invisible wife. The fluorescent lights of Lane 4 hummed with a sharp, sickening buzz. The air smelled of stale disinfectant, damp cardboard, and warm plastic. Beep, beep, beep. My right arm moved on autopilot, dragging heavy boxes of cereal, cold gallons of milk, and frozen dinners over the red laser scanner. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My neck felt like a twisted wire. A young mother with 2 screaming toddlers stepped up to my register. She pushed a cart packed with fresh fruit, bread, and 2 gallons of whole milk. "I have a store coupon on my app," she said, her voice strained, her hands clutching a crying baby. "No problem," I said, offering a soft smile. "I can scan that right off your screen." I scanned the milk, the bread, the produce. The total came to $42.16. I reached for my own purse under the counter, pulling out the blue joint debit card mark, and I shared. I used my employee discount, then swiped the card through the black card reader. The machine paused. A harsh, high-pitched double beep echoed through the quiet aisle. "Declined." Red letters flashed on the small screen. I stared at it. My thumb pressed the card again. I swiped it hard. "Declined." "Is there a problem?" the mother asked, leaning over the counter, her eyes darting between her screaming children and my face. "Just a second." I whispered. My cheeks burned hot with sudden embarrassment. Let me try one more time. I swiped it again. The machine spat out the same sharp beep. Declined. I paid for her groceries using $20 bills from my own tip jar money, packed her bags, and sent her on her way with an apology. As soon as she walked away, my hands started to shake. I pulled my phone from my apron pocket, stepping into the dim shadow behind the cigarette rack. The air smelled of tobacco and dust. My thumb tapped the banking app. The screen is loaded. My breath caught in my chest. Checking account, $14.32. Savings account, $0. $85,000. Gone. My eyes scrolled down the transaction history. 8 separate wire transfers. 8 large blocks of money moved out over 6 weeks. 8, 10, $12,000 at a time. All executed while Arthur was lying in a hospital bed with a metal bolt in his hip, and while I was working double shifts to pay for grocery bills. My throat went dry as bone. The floor beneath my work shoes felt like it was tilting. 40 miles away, on Forbes Avenue in downtown Pittsburgh, Arthur Vance stepped out of a yellow taxicab. The sky above the river was a heavy, slate gray. The crisp air carried the metallic smell of wet steel and river rain. He leaned heavily on a cheap aluminum cane he had bought at a bus station. Every step sent a sharp, grinding pang through his right hip joint, but his jaw remained set in a hard, rigid line. He walked into a small, old-fashioned pharmacy on Murray Avenue. The shop smelled of talcum powder, rubbing alcohol, and dried lavender. Arthur pulled his orange pill bottle from his navy jacket pocket and set it on the glass counter. I need a refill on this anti-inflammatory, Arthur said, his voice low and gravelly. The young woman behind the register picked up the bottle. She turned it over under the bright overhead desk lamp. She frowned. "Sir, this label is crooked," she said, her finger tracing the edge of the paper. "And the tape underneath. This isn't our label." "I know my own handwriting," Arthur said, leaning his weight onto the counter. "I marked that bottle myself before I went into surgery." "Wait a minute," a sharp, clear voice spoke from the aisle behind him. An older woman stepped out from between the medicine shelves. She wore a practical gray wool coat. Her hair was cut short, silver, and neat. She carried a small paper prescription bag. Her sharp hazel eyes took in Arthur's pale face, his trembling hands on the cane, and the orange bottle on the glass counter. "Walter? Walter Hayes," she asked, using his full name. Arthur turned slowly. "Evelyn." Evelyn Foster had been a head nurse at Allegheny General Hospital for 34 years. She had spent 11 nights holding Arthur's late wife's hand when cancer took her breath away. She walked right up to the counter, took the orange bottle from the cashier, and twisted off the childproof cap. She tipped a single pill into her palm. It was round, pale yellow, with a tiny 3-digit code stamped across its face. "This isn't an anti-inflammatory pill, Walter," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a hard clinical tone. "This is diphenhydramine. It's a high-dose over-the-counter sedative. If an elderly person takes this every day, it causes severe drowsiness, memory fogginess, and confusion. It mimics early dementia." Arthur froze. The air left his lungs in a cold gasp. He swapped the pills. "Who swapped them?" Evelyn asked, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "My son," Arthur rasped. "Mark." 10 minutes later, Arthur sat in the high-ceilinged office of Attorney James Miller on Penn Avenue. The room smelled of old leather books, cold coffee, and printing ink. James Miller was 60 years old, built like a retired boxer, with thick gray eyebrows and eyes that missed nothing. Miller leaned over his desk, his fingers tapping a printed legal document from the Franklin County Probate Court. "Your son didn't just take your money, Mr. Hayes," Miller said, sliding the paper across the dark wood. "3 days before your hip surgery, Mark filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship over your person and your estate. Arthur gripped the wooden arms of the leather chair. Guardianship. Yes, Miller said cleanly. In Ohio, a guardianship strips you of all legal rights. Mark claimed you suffered from severe cognitive decline and memory loss. He attached a note from a doctor I've never heard of, stating you showed signs of confusion. He used those yellow pills to manufacture the symptoms. Miller pulled a second paper from a thick yellow folder. He also filed a property appraisal on your house in Columbus 5 months ago. He has a straw buyer lined up, a real estate speculator named Roy Decker. Mark owes over $400,000 in private business debts and bad investments. He was going to use the guardianship to sell your home out from under you before you even finished physical therapy. Arthur looked down at his own rough, calloused hands. The rage inside his chest was no longer a hot, blinding fire. It turned cold, hard, and sharp like carbon steel. He built a trap, Arthur said quietly. He built a case, Miller corrected. And right now, the court believes him because you haven't responded. Arthur stood up from the leather chair. He didn't use his cane to push off. He stood straight, his broad shoulders squared against the gray light streaming through the office window. File a revocation of his power of attorney today. Mr. Miller, Arthur said, his voice flat, steady, and deadly calm. And prepare a countermotion. I'm going back to Columbus. Back to his house. Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Arthur said, his eyes fixing on the city skyline outside. An engineer doesn't run from a cracked foundation. He walks right up to it, finds every fault line, and tears the wall down. The heavy oak front door clicked shut. Arthur stepped back into the house on a cold Monday afternoon. The air inside smelled of artificial vanilla candle wax, expensive carpet cleaner, and stale roast chicken. Mark rushed out of the kitchen, a bright, rehearsed smile plastered across his face. Dad, you came back, Mark said, his voice loud and artificially warm. He reached for Arthur's small navy suitcase. We were worried sick. Hannah was asking about you all morning. This is your home, Dad. Arthur didn't pull the bag away. He let Mark take it. I miss my family, Mark, Arthur said, his voice flat and smooth as polished granite. Pittsburgh was cold. Of course it was, Mark said, his eyes flicking over Arthur's face, searching for signs of weakness, searching for confusion. Finding none, he clapped his hands together. Your room is exactly as you left it. That night, at 11:30 p.m., the house went silent. Hannah stood in the dark kitchen, leaning against the cold granite counter. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She watched Mark through the crack of the pantry door. Mark stood near the sink under the dim microwave light. He opened Arthur's small orange pill bottle. He tipped out 3 white oval tablets, slipped them into his sweatpants pocket, and replaced them with 3 pale yellow round pills from an unmarked plastic bag. He screwed the cap back on, set the bottle next to the silver coffee maker, and walked away. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Her blood ran cold. The final veil of her 15-year marriage tore away. Mark wasn't just selfish. He wasn't just drowning in debt. He was actively poisoning his own father to steal his home. 10 minutes later, Hannah walked out to the dark back porch. The cold autumn wind whipped her hair across her face. The air smelled of wet pine needles and frost. Arthur sat on the old wooden bench, wrapped in his heavy wool coat. He just swapped them, Hannah whispered, her voice shaking, sharp as glass. I saw him, Dad. He put the yellow pills back. Arthur didn't flinch. He slowly looked up, his pale blue eyes clear and steady under the moonlight. I know, Hannah, Arthur said softly. He's been doing it since September. But we aren't going to cry about it. Hannah looked at the old man's weathered face. In that quiet, freezing darkness, something fundamental snapped inside her. The helpless, exhausted retail clerk vanished. The victim, who spent 15 years apologizing for existing, died right there on that cold porch. "What do we do?" Hannah asked. Her voice didn't shake anymore. It was hard, clear, and focused. "We stop reacting," Arthur said, his rough hand covering hers. "We build a case." The next morning, Hannah began her transformation. First came her mindset. She stopped crying in her car before her work shifts. She stopped asking Mark for approval. When Mark tried to insult her job or call her exhausted, she didn't look down. She looked him straight in the eyes, her expression blank, her posture straight as an iron rod. She took control of her own happiness. Second came her physical presence and self-care. She cut her frayed, dead hair into a sharp, neat shoulder-length bob. She threw away her faded, oversized sweatshirts. She bought crisp button-down shirts, fitted dark jeans, and sturdy leather boots. She started running 2 miles every morning at 5:30 a.m., feeling the cold morning air fill her lungs, rebuilding her strength step by step. Third came her practical, methodical actions. Hannah used her retail inventory training, the exact skill Mark always ridiculed, to build an airtight evidence file. As a legal co-owner of the house, Hannah had every right to secure the property. She bought 3 tiny, wireless recording devices that looked like white commercial temperature sensors. She mounted one above the front hall coat rack, one behind the living room speaker, and one beside the upstairs thermostat. On Tuesday night, her hidden camera caught Mark pacing the living room at 9:45 p.m., his phone pressed to his ear. "The guardianship hearing is December 12th. Mark's recorded voice echoed clearly through Hannah's phone earpiece. "I need the property appraisal filed before that. Tell Roy the purchase agreement needs to be ready to go the moment the judge signs the order. If we get the old man to sign at the family meeting, we won't even need to wait for the final decree." Hannah saved the video file, encrypted it, and backed it up to a cloud server. Next, Hannah used her phone while Mark was in the shower. His laptop sat open on the kitchen island. She took clear, high-resolution photographs of an email thread between Mark and a psychiatrist named Dr. Simmons. Confirmed for December 12th on-site assessment, Dr. Simmons had written, "Bring the cognitive battery. If results show any impairment, we proceed." Below it, Mark had replied, "Document any hesitation as clinically significant memory impairment. We need this report locked down before the court date." Finally, Hannah took total control of her financial life. She walked into a local credit union during her lunch break, opened a private checking account under her maiden name, and redirected her store paychecks away from their joint account. She cut off Mark's access to her hard-earned income. By Sunday night, Hannah sat at the small desk in the guest room while Mark was out meeting his real estate contacts. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft blue glow of her laptop screen. She opened her email. She attached the video recording of Mark planning the illegal property sale, the photos of his bribing emails to Dr. Simmons, and the bank statements showing his fraudulent medical withdrawals. She typed out a short, precise message to attorney James Miller. "Mr. Miller, attached is the digital evidence file for Arthur Hayes's countermotion. I am ready to testify as an eyewitness to the medication tampering and financial fraud. Hannah Vance." She pressed send. The digital chime signaled the message was gone. Hannah closed the laptop lid with a soft, decisive click. She walked over to the window, holding a warm cup of black tea. Outside, the November darkness hung heavy over the suburban street. Down the hall, she could hear the faint, muffled sound of Mark's footsteps as his car pulled into the driveway. He thought he was the master architect of this house. He thought he was playing a game against a confused old man and an invisible broken wife. He had no idea that every beam, every nail, and every floorboard of his trap had already been dismantled from the inside. Hannah took a slow sip of her tea, her reflection in the dark glass standing tall, sharp, and entirely free. The living room smelled of burnt coffee, artificial lavender spray, and cold rain. Mark had arranged 8 metal folding chairs in a neat semicircle facing the fireplace. A small portable projector sat on the mahogany coffee table, its cooling fan humming like a trapped insect, casting a bright, harsh square of white light onto the far wall. Mark moved through the room in a sharp blue blazer. His leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. He adjusted his collar, checking his reflection in the dark window pane. He looked confident. He looked like a man in total control of his environment. By 10 a.m., the room held 8 people. 2 of Mark's cousins sat on the left, shifting uncomfortably on the metal seats. Near the front door stood Roy Decker, wearing an oversized gray suit, his eyes darting toward the entryway, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. In the middle row sat Dr. Simmons, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, clutching a dark leather portfolio across his lap. In the back corner, near the hallway, sat Attorney James Miller. Mark had not invited him. When Mark first noticed Miller sitting quietly in the shadows, his jaw tightened, but he quickly forced a smooth, practiced smile onto his face. He believed he had already won. He believed the room was his stage. Arthur sat in a high-backed armchair near the window. He wore a clean blue button-down shirt and brown trousers. His back was straight. His hands rested flat on his knees. Next to him stood Hannah, dressed in a sharp black blazer and dark trousers, her hair cut into a neat, precise bob. Beside her stood 14-year-old Leo, clutching a heavy cardboard box against his chest. Mark stepped into the center of the square of white light. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," Mark began. His voice was warm, polished, and steady. "We are here today out of love. As many of you know, my father underwent major surgery 3 months ago. Since then, we have noticed troubling changes. Confusion, memory loss, an inability to manage basic household tasks and financial affairs. It breaks my heart to say this, but my father can no longer live unassisted." Mark paused, letting his words settle into the silent room. One of the cousins nodded slowly. To ensure his protection, Mark continued, gesturing toward the coffee table. "I have prepared an emergency transition plan. We have a licensed buyer ready to acquire my father's property to cover his long-term care costs. And we have Dr. Simmons here today to conduct a formal cognitive assessment." Mark turned to the doctor. "Dr. Simmons, if you would begin." Dr. Simmons unclasped his leather portfolio. He adjusted his glasses and stepped toward Arthur. The room went dead silent, except for the low, monotonous whir of the projector fan. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Simmons said, his tone dry and professional, "I am going to ask you a series of standard questions. Please answer to the best of your ability." Arthur looked at the doctor. His pale blue eyes were crystal clear. "Go ahead," Arthur said. His voice was low and firm as steel. "Can you tell me today's date, the day of the week, and the current president?" Dr. Simmons asked, holding a pen over a printed score sheet. "Today is Thursday, December 12th. Arthur spoke without a second of hesitation. "The year is 2024. The president is Joe Biden." Dr. Simmons blinked. He made a small mark on his paper. "I want you to count backward from 100 by sevens. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, 2. Arthur recited the numbers swiftly, his voice even, as if he were reading measurements off a mechanical blueprint. Dr. Simmons's hand froze above the paper. A small drop of sweat glinted on his forehead under the bright light. He cleared his throat. "I am going to name 3 objects," the doctor said, his voice losing its polished edge. "Apple, table, penny. Remember them." "I don't need to recall them later." Arthur cut in cleanly. "Apple, table, penny. Ask me to draw a clock set to 10 minutes past 11, and I will draw you a circle with perfect 12-part radial symmetry and hand placement accurate to the millimeter. I spent 40 years aligning diesel engine crankshafts, Doctor. My mind is not broken." Dr. Simmons stared at Arthur. The room was motionless. The cousins leaned forward. Mark took a step toward the center of the room, his face pale. "Dr. Simmons," Mark rasped, an edge of panic leaking into his voice. "Perhaps we should move to the memory processing section." "That won't be necessary," Dr. Simmons said flatly. He snapped his leather portfolio shut with a loud, sharp crack that echoed off the walls. He looked at Mark with an expression of cold disgust. "Mr. Hayes, your father possesses complete cognitive clarity. His executive function and processing speed are exceptional. There is zero clinical basis for an impairment claim. I am done here." Dr. Simmons turned on his heel, grabbed his coat, and walked straight out the front door. Mark stood frozen in the middle of the room. The color had drained completely from his cheeks. "Wait, Dr. Simmons." "He's not coming back, Mark," a voice rang out. It was Hannah. She stepped into the center of the light. She did not tremble. She did not hesitate. She picked up a small black cable from her blazer pocket, stepped to the coffee table, and plugged her phone directly into the projector's input port. The white square on the wall flickered blue, then burst into high-definition color. A video played on the wall. The camera angle was high, looking down at the kitchen sink. The timestamp in the corner read 11:32 p.m., November 14th. On the screen, Mark stood under the dim yellow microwave light. He opened Arthur's orange pill bottle. He tipped 3 oval white pills into his palm, slipped them into his sweatpants pocket, and dropped 3 round yellow pills back into the bottle. His face on the wall was huge, clear, and unmistakable. Gasps erupted from the metal chairs. The cousins sat back, their mouths open in shock. Hannah tapped her phone screen again. A document appeared on the wall. It was the photograph of Mark's email exchange with Dr. Simmons. Hannah read Mark's typed words aloud, her voice ringing clear through the room. "Document any hesitation as clinically significant memory impairment. We need this report locked down before the court date." She tapped the screen a 3rd time. A bank spreadsheet filled the wall, showing 8 wire transfers totaling $85,000, alongside fake invoices for specialized elderly care created under a shell company registered in Mark's name. Roy Decker stared at the wall. His face turned a sickly gray. He backed toward the door, his eyes wide with terror. "You told me the old man agreed to this." Roy yelled, his voice cracking with fury. "You told me he was incompetent, and the sale was pre-approved. I'm not going to jail for your fraud, Mark." Roy grabbed his coat, yanked the front door open, and ran down the driveway, slamming the door behind him. The cousins stood up from their chairs without a word, staring at Mark as if he were a complete stranger, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. Mark stood alone in the center of the room. His hands hung loose at his sides. The projector cast the bright red numbers of his stolen money directly across his chest. "Hannah," Mark whispered. His voice cracked. "Rachel, please. You don't understand. I did this for us. I was drowning. The business." "Do not lie to me," Hannah said. Her voice was quiet, hard, and colder than the December wind outside. "You didn't do this for us. You did this because you thought I was invisible. You thought my father-in-law was weak. You thought you could destroy 2 lives to cover your own failures." From the back of the room, 14-year-old Leo walked forward. He did not look at the projector wall. He walked straight up to his father. He set the heavy cardboard box down on the mahogany table with a loud, heavy thud. The box was a brand new PlayStation 5 console, still wrapped in its original plastic, which Mark had brought home 2 weeks ago as a gift. Leo looked his father straight in the eyes. "Dad," Leo said. His voice was steady, quiet, and carried a weight far beyond his 14 years. "I asked you a question a few weeks ago, and you never answered me. So I'll ask you again." Mark stared at his son, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "When you get old," Leo said, his words cutting through the air like a blade, "do you want me to switch your pills and steal your money the way you did to Grandpa? Because I am taking this back. I don't want anything bought with betrayal." Mark looked at his son. His chin trembled. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer an excuse, to twist the narrative one last time, but no sound came out. He looked at Leo's clear, unyielding eyes and realized that his authority, his dignity, and his status as a father had been completely erased. Mark collapsed into one of the empty metal chairs. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as deep, muffled sobs broke through his chest. The front door opened softly. Attorney James Miller walked in, followed by a tall man in a dark suit holding a thick white envelope. The process server stepped up to Mark, set the envelope on his lap, and spoke clearly. "Mark Vance, you have been served with an emergency restraining order, a petition for the immediate dismissal of your guardianship filing, and a civil lawsuit for financial fraud." James Miller turned to Hannah and Arthur. "The judge signed the restraining order an hour ago. He has no access to your property or your accounts." Arthur stood up from his chair. He walked over to Hannah and set his heavy, rough hand gently on her shoulder. "Let's go home, Hannah," Arthur said quietly. Hannah looked at Mark one last time. A man broken not by bad luck, but by his own deceit. She felt no hatred. She felt no desire for revenge. She felt only a deep, cleansing sense of relief. Hannah reached down, took Leo's hand in hers, and turned toward the door. Together, the three of them stepped out of the dark, heavy house and walked out into the crisp, bright winter air. The sweet, earthy smell of damp soil and blooming clover filled the warm May afternoon. Sunlight streamed down in long, golden shafts through the leaves of the old oak tree in Arthur's front yard. The sky above Columbus was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Arthur sat on his white wooden porch chair, the old Adirondack seat he and Leo had repaired together months ago. Its legs were level, its frame solid, sanded smooth to the touch, and painted a crisp, clean white. Next to him, Leo sat at a small wooden table, his pencil moving smoothly across a large sheet of grid paper, drafting a detailed architectural blueprint for his high school engineering project. The screen door clicked open with a familiar, gentle rustle. Hannah walked out onto the porch carrying a tray, with 3 tall glasses of iced lemonade. She wore a light green summer dress that caught the warm breeze. Her hair was styled in a sharp, vibrant bob that framed her face. Her eyes were bright, clear, and calm. Her skin radiated a healthy, natural glow. There were no traces of the exhausted retail clerk who once hid in the dark corners of a store aisle. "Break time, architect," Hannah said with a warm smile, setting a glass down next to Leo's drawings. "Thanks, Mom." Leo grinned, taking a sip. He looked up at her, his eyes full of pride. "Did you finish the regional store report?" "Submitted an hour ago," Hannah replied, leaning against the porch railing. Over the past 5 months, Hannah's life had undergone a complete transformation. She stopped waiting for someone else to fix her reality. She enrolled in an advanced retail management program, studying late into the night after her shifts. Her dedication, precision, and natural leadership caught the attention of corporate executives. Within 4 months, she was promoted from an assistant store clerk to regional store manager, tripling her income and securing complete financial independence for herself and her son. She finalized her divorce from Mark calmly and quietly, securing full legal custody of Leo. She did not ask for alimony. She did not seek revenge. She took control of her own happiness, step by step, dollar by dollar. "How is the foundation file coming along, Dad?" Hannah asked, turning to Arthur. Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He set his lemonade glass on the small table. "James Miller finalized the registration this morning," Arthur said, his voice deep and steady. "The Walter and Eleanor Vance Foundation is officially active." Using the untouched funds from his old, protected Millbrook LLC investment, Arthur and Hannah had established a nonprofit legal assistance trust. The foundation provided free legal, medical, and financial defense for elderly citizens facing financial exploitation by family members, as well as resources for women escaping emotional abuse in marriage. The money that Mark had tried so hard to steal was now serving as a shield for hundreds of vulnerable people across Ohio. At that moment, a dark sedan turned onto the quiet suburban street. It slowed down as it approached the driveway. The driver's side window was rolled halfway down. It was Mark. He looked thin, hollow, and worn out. His shoulders were slouched against the steering wheel. He had been forced to file for personal bankruptcy to handle his $400,000 in business debts, and he was working 2 low-level jobs while living in a small studio apartment across town. He idled near the curb for a long moment, staring at the porch through the shimmering heat waves rising off the pavement. He looked at Arthur, sitting straight and strong in his solid chair. He looked at Leo laughing at his drawing board. He looked at Hannah, standing tall, elegant, and completely self-sufficient in the golden sunlight. Mark did not get out of the car. He did not open the door. He knew there was no space for his lies, no audience for his drama, and no power left in his manipulations. After a long, silent minute, he tapped the gas pedal, and the car rolled away, disappearing around the corner. Hannah watched the red taillights vanish. Her heart did not race. Her hands did not shake. There was no anger left in her chest, no bitter resentment, and no lingering regret for the 15 years she had lost. There was only a profound, quiet peace. She took a slow, deep breath of the sweet May air, tasting the cool lemonade on her tongue, feeling the warm sun against her skin. She turned back to her son and her father-in-law. The old rose bush by the front steps, which had looked dead and bare in the freezing winter cold, was now covered in bright, fragrant red blossoms. Everything that mattered was standing. Everything that had been broken was rebuilt on a foundation that would hold forever. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.